As violence was rapidly escalating, Stormont, to put it lightly, was getting a bit concerned. So they did what governments do best in the face of a crisis: seize more power. And thus, on the 9th of August, 1971, launched Operation Demetrius in an attempt to arrest paramilitants without trial. On the first day of the operation, 342 were arrested, put in internment camps or a British prison ship. However, this wasn't without problems. The arrests were all based on hopelessly out-of-date intelligence, meaning most, if not all of those arrested were either innocent or part of the old IRA. The camps were also accused of using torture against internees. Just make it stop! Unionists were initially happy with Faulkner's tough stance on the IRA, although became less happy after it became clear it wasn't working. Nationalists, on the other hand, were, well, mildly annoyed. So mildly annoyed, in fact, that they began to engage in violent protests all over Northern Ireland as they felt the policy was biased against them. As a result of the riot, 2,100 had to flee their homes. Hurry up, Martha! I'm getting the portrait of King Billy! SDLP politicians encouraged citizens to refuse to pay rent. Politicians also staged a 48-hour hunger strike. As a result of all the violence that happened, 30 soldiers died, as well as 11 policemen, resulting in their tactics becoming much more aggressive. For example, 30th of January, 1972, a march was to be held through the Bogside to protest internment. The marchers eventually came to an army barricade, where troops from the Parachute Regiment had been ordered to arrest members of the Derry Young Hooligans, as they had been harassing the police and army with guns and bombs in the weeks prior. As they reached this barricade, a group split off from the main protest and began to hurl rocks at the barricade and the troops on it. In response, the soldiers opened fire. After they began to flee, soldiers continued to pursue them, killing even more. In the aftermath, 13 men were shot dead and 13 were wounded, of which one would later die. Paratroopers responsible claimed that they were attacked by the IRA. Unionists, for the most part, bought this reasoning. Well, nationalists were, well, not so convinced. Nationalists believed that all those who were shot dead were completely innocent. The CEO of Ireland, Jack Lynch, announced a day of national mourning. On top of that, there was a 30,000-strong march in Dublin, which then proceeded to burn down both the British Embassy and loot British-owned shops. The IRA also began a bombing campaign in England. On the 22nd of February, they hit the paratroopers' headquarters, ironically only killing 5 women and a Catholic priest. The Wingery Tribunal was later created to investigate Bloody Sunday. Then, 11 weeks later, they came back, saying it was caused by IRA provocation. Lies.
Rubbish.
The whole thing had the effect of polarizing the whole community, making many sign up to the IRA in reprisal. SDLP leader John Hume even went as far as saying, many now feel it's a united Ireland or nothing. Unionists were shocked at the new surge in IRA recruitment. We're all gonna die! And thus, Ulster Vanguard was set up to demand tougher actions against Republicans. Northern Ireland Prime Minister Brian Faulkner was understandably concerned about what was unfolding before him. So he went to Parliament to request permission to implement tougher safety measures. But Prime Minister Heath, who was also growing very concerned, issued his own list of demands. But the Unionist government saw his list and said, you know what this is? Codswallop. And thus resigned, thinking it would convince Heath to back down. But you see, Heath didn't really seem to have a problem with this, and simply said, okay, well, I suppose I'll just take complete control then. Wait, hang on, he can do that? And thus, on the 24th of March, he suspended Stormont. Nationalists as a whole were quite pleased with this development, as they saw Stormont as discriminatory and hoped that London would begin introducing radical reforms. However, Redcoat continued to protest, and the IRA simply said that the war goes on, viewing any form of British rule as unacceptable. Unionists, on the other hand, were, well, rather perturbed. We're all gonna die! In the 1960s and 70s, Britain had abandoned most of its empire, and thus Unionists now suspected that they were now going to simply hand Northern Ireland over to the south. Ulster Vanguard led a series of strikes. There was a 100,000-strong rally, and many, many more people began to join loyalist paramilitaries. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be shortly passing over Politics Land. On behalf of the whole crew, I strongly recommend that you take this moment to go get a sip of water and get some matchsticks to hold your eyes open with, as you may begin to feel extremely bored. On the 1st of July, 20 bombs were detonated in Belfast, which became known as Bloody Friday. Additionally, on the 31st of July, the IRA bombed Claudy, killing 9 more civilians. In response to these bombings, Operation Motorman was initiated to clear out no-go areas from paramilitaries. It worked! Ha! Loser! And the success of this operation began to encourage people to seek a solution to the conflict. In March 1973, London shared some of its proposals for an agreement. Some people were in support of this, such as OUP members to Brian Faulkner, as well as... Yep, that's about it. The biggest problem other unionists had was the proposed Council of Ireland, as they did not want to give power to people disloyal to the union. When the power-sharing executive was confirmed on the 1st of November 1973, 2 of the 3 points were agreed on, but unionists refused to agree on the Council of Ireland. Discussions on what a new government should look like began on the 6th of December 1973 in Sunningdale, Berkshire. However, no anti-power-sharing politicians were invited, as Dublin said they would only slow the process down. The unionists Ian Paisley and William Craig were invited to share their views, declined in protest. Eventually, they came to terms on the following point, with some rather mixed responses, with only 1/3 of the country approving. Nationalists were very pleased with it, and it gave them further connections to the Republic of Ireland. Republicans, however, were not, as it didn't do nearly as much as they wanted it to do, and thus responded in the only way they knew how: bombing London. Meanwhile, unionists were almost universally against the proposal. Their main problems were that, number one, they felt the Council of Ireland gave the Republic far more power than they deserved. The leading body at the OUP, the UUC, voted to reject Sunningdale, resulting in their leader, Brian Faulkner, being forced to resign as party leader. Loyalists also went about establishing the Ulster Army Council to resist the Irish dimension, as they called it. Anyways, the UK had a general election in 1974. Some political shenanigans happened, and as a result, 11 of the 12 provinces were won by the UUC. The UUC portrayed this as a major victory and as a referendum on Sunningdale, and as a result, protests and violence increased as a result of opposition to the agreement. And easily the largest one was the UWC strike. Organised by the UWC, a group of Protestant trade unionists, most of Northern Ireland's industry and infrastructure was shut down. On the 21st of May, a back-to-work demonstration was held, but only about 200 people showed up. On the 25th of May, Prime Minister Wilson lost patience with the strikers and lashed out at them, calling them all a bunch of spongers. All this did was make the strikers more angry, further encouraged them to just stay at home. Back to work, I suppose. You know what, never mind. After the army refused to break up the strikes by force, Faulkner, head of the new assembly, had to resign. Again. Other unionist MPs followed suit, causing the collapse of the assembly. Direct rule was reintroduced, meaning Sunningdale had failed. Anyways, let's talk about something actually interesting for a while. The IRA. Northern Ireland secretaries Marilyn Rees and Roy Mason introduced 2 new policies: authorization and criminalization. The former was to reduce the number of troops in Northern Ireland, increase the number of RUC, and the latter ended the special category status granted to arrested paramilitants, meaning that they would now be treated like normal prisoners, not POWs. Prisoners would now be stored in prisons named H-blocks due to their shape. So as you could imagine, Republicans who had been arrested were not very amused with this recategorization, and thus protested. In 1967, they refused to wear prison clothing, instead wearing bedsheets. But the only thing this achieved was making them look like idiots. Then, in 1978, they began the Dirty Protest, where they would fling excrement at the walls and other such actions. This got them a bit more attention, but once again, the response was, "Hey, well, it's their cell, they can do with it what they want with it, I suppose." Yeah. Then, in 1980, someone had a genius idea. Hey, what if we just starved ourselves? And so they did. But still, the Northern Ireland Secretary refused to cooperate. The strike was called off after 7 people believed had won concessions. They hadn't. So on the 1st of March, 1981, round 2 was declared. This time, however, they would stagger the entries to the strike, so as they would all die of starvation at different times, in order to keep a constant flow of deaths in the news. This created huge support for the strikers among the nationalist community, even winning their leader, Bobby Sands, a position as an MP. Shortly after that, the government concluded that that wasn't how the game was supposed to be played, and made it illegal to run for office from prison. Sands would die shortly after his victory, on the 5th of May, 1981, with 100,000 attending his funeral. 9 more prisoners would die until the 3rd of October, when concessions were finally granted. What came out of this is that the IRA were very surprised at Sands' victory, which made them think, say, we should try more of that politics stuff. Sands' victory was also proven to not be a simple fluke, when Owen Carron also won his election. Thus, at their Ard Fresh meeting, the IRA's political wing, Sinn Féin, concluded that they would use extracurricular methods to prop up their votes. They began to win a number of different council seats, even displacing Jerry Fitt with Jerry Adams in West Belfast. This worried both the SDLP and the British government. It worried the SDLP as their whole voting base just seemed to be dissolving underneath them. And it worried the British as they felt they could at least talk to the SDLP and try to reach an agreement. Whereas the IRA were, well... Furthermore, the IRA went ahead and attempted to assassinate Margaret Thatcher. In the end, the government decided to hand the SDLP a victory in the form of the Anglo-Irish Agreement in order to boost their support. The most significant point of it being that it would force the Republic to accept that Northern Ireland would only reunite with the South peacefully, with the idea being if nationalists accepted that Northern Ireland could only unite on peaceful terms, Sinn Féin would collapse. Overall, not many people liked this whole agreement. The Unionists felt abandoned by their government and that it was the first step towards a united Ireland. Sinn Féin obviously didn't like it, as the whole point of the agreement was to collapse their support. And they were also not pleased as it made the Republic recognise Northern Ireland's legitimacy. The Republic were a bit unsure whether they liked it or not. While some supported it, others, such as Charles Hogney and Mary Robinson, did not, later resigning in protest. They didn't like how Unionists didn't like the agreement, as they believed that for a united Ireland to work, both sides had to be on board with it. Only groups that seemed to be almost fully supportive of the agreement were the SDLP, obviously, since the agreement was tailor-made to give them votes at the expense of their biggest rival, Sinn Féin. And the British government also mostly supported this. However, Private Secretary Ian Gough did resign in protest, arguing the agreement was forced through by violence. In opposition to the agreement, bonfires were made with effigies of Margaret Thatcher and the Irish Foreign Secretary. There were strikes, there were rallies, there was just about everything on the political turmoil bingo card. Overall, these strategies were unsuccessful, since there was no government for them to collapse. In 1980, SDLP leader John Hume believed that they could get somewhere by talking to the IRA. Due to no other party or government wanting to do this, and the SDLP already being quite divided on the issue, Hume began to have secret meetings with Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams in 1988, which would come to be known as the Adams-Hume Initiative. In 1992, Sinn Féin would publish a document titled Towards a Lasting Peace, which basically said, "We will try to stop bombing people and start being cool." In response, the UK Secretary of State Peter Brook claimed that the UK government would act imaginatively so long as the IRA declared a ceasefire. In response, the IRA declared a ceasefire. In 1988, he issued a statement that Britain had no selfish, strategic or economic interests in Northern Ireland. Brooke then went about establishing a back channel to allow the UK government to communicate with the IRA directly. He also attempted to start discussions between the nationalist and unionist parties. However, these failed, since unionists were still angry about the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Eventually, 3 points were agreed on that would be needed for any future peace deal. However, little progress was made on these points, as no one could decide who to chair the North-South element. In April 1993, the Adams-Hume Initiative recommended a joint statement be issued by the Republic government and the UK government in support of self-determination for the people of Northern Ireland. However, the UK government and the Republic refused to use this as a starting point due to its link with Adams. So they went ahead and used that as a starting point by issuing the Downing Street Declaration, which involves far too many words. Sinn Féin liked the idea of self-determination, but still thought it gave Unionists a veto. Unionists were also mixed in their reaction. They liked that London was reaffirming their control, but also didn't like its green tinge, as they put it. Irish government representatives were able to convince the IRA to use the declaration as a reason to justify a ceasefire, issuing a statement reading that Sinn Féin would need to be involved in any future inclusive negotiations. The British government responded by wanting to make the ceasefire permanent, but the IRA were unconvinced. Loyalist paramilitaries, unconvinced that the IRA would keep their word, would wait another 6 weeks before also declaring a ceasefire on the 13th of October 1994. In February, both London and Dublin released a document, each detailing what they wanted out of a future settlement. In summary, Unionists didn't like how similar it was to Sunningdale, or the idea of having more links to the Republic. Nationalists didn't like it either, as they believed that it let Unionists veto the whole process. Anyways, you might be getting rather bored watching this. And you know who else was also getting bored? The IRA. And in response to British attempts to disarm them, they detonated a bomb in Canary Wharf, Docklands, killing 2, injuring hundreds, causing many Unionists to believe that the IRA declaring ceasefires was just a new tactic. Peace talks once again began in 1996, but this time without Sinn Féin. However, nothing would happen until a stronger government could be formed, and said stronger government came in 1997 when Labour came to power, as they were able to do pretty much whatever they wanted, since they didn't rely on Unionist votes as the prior Conservative government did. In summary, Tony Blair let the IRA back in for negotiations, and they renewed their ceasefire. However, some in the IRA did not want to go back to a ceasefire, and thus broke off to form on the new IRA, which is still a problem in Northern Ireland today, albeit a minor one. Eventually, it was decided that all the talks had to be done by the 9th of April, 1998, as the conflict had already dragged on for about 30 years at this point. And someone also pointed out that Redcoat history was going to come along in about 20 years and have to write a script about these events, and that if they didn't hurry up and finish the agreement, this script may very well reach page 80. Tony Blair and his good friend Bill Clinton also joined the talks in order to speed them up. Anyways, the 9th of April came and... never mind, they're still talking, but they eventually managed to get something written down, which once again, even the summary triggers my logophobia. Unionists were quite unhappy with it, as the DUP and UKUP were not present for negotiations. The UUP negotiator, Jeffrey Donaldson, even walking out of the deal as it neared completion. Republicans were also initially unconvinced about disarmament, but with some persuading from Sinn Féin, they did. On the 22nd of May, 1998, referendums were held, overwhelming support from all parties, except the DUP, some UUP members, and Margaret Thatcher. 72% of the population came out in favour of the deal, and while it is hard to tell how each community felt about the deal, as Northern Ireland was treated as one constituency, it is estimated that 97% of nationalists were in favour of the deal, while 52% of unionists were. And in the Republic of Ireland, there was a 94.4% agreement on the deal. Elections were held in June of 1988, with 80 of 108 seats going to pro-power sharing candidates. It met for the first time on the 15th of July, 1998, with Lord Alderdice being appointed as presiding officer by the Secretary of State. And finally, David Trimble was elected as the first First Minister, and SDLP Seamus Mallon first Deputy First Minister. Anyways, I've had enough of this. It's currently 1 a.m. I'm tired. I've been writing the script for several weeks now.
Hello, editor Redcoat speaking here. So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now, you'll notice that it's currently 4 a.m. This is in fact not the first time it's been 4 a.m. while I've been editing. And this is in fact the second. I am on my second all-nighter editing this.
I've been staying alive on a diet of blood, sweat, tears, and digestive biscuits. I feel as if my will to live has been run over by a bus, scooped up from the road using a cheese grater, then packaged up and sent on a nice relaxing holiday to Ukraine. I am now going to jump out of this window. Goodbye. Freedom!